Imagine living in a world where beauty wasn't just admired, it was survived. Where pale skin meant privilege, but achieving it could poison you. Where a noble woman's glow came from bloodletting, and her delicate complexion was built on layers of toxic lead. In the medieval world, beauty was a battlefield, and every compliment came at a cost. The idea of looking good could quite literally shorten your life. Welcome to History for Sleep, where we tell the calm, curious, and sometimes unbelievable stories of the past to help you drift into rest. Tonight, we'll explore the brutal world of medieval beauty, the strange rituals, painful routines, and deadly secrets people followed, all in the name of perfection. From noble women plucking their hairlines to peasants boiling herbs for natural dyes, every part of society was touched by beauty's strange power. Before we begin, take a moment to relax, find a comfortable spot, and let your breathing slow down. As you settle in, remember to subscribe to the channel so you can join us again for more stories of the world as it once was, quietly told to help you rest. Comment below and tell us what kind of history you'd like to hear next. Or when you usually listen in, do you drift off right away or stay until the end? Your ideas shape the next sleepy stories we share here. Tonight's journey is one of quiet horror and quiet fascination. The medieval idea of beauty wasn't soft or simple. It was sharp, painful, and bound to status, faith, and survival. Yet, behind the powders, plucking, and perfumes were real people who simply wanted to feel admired, to belong, and to be seen. As you listen, imagine their world unfolding slowly. Candlelight flickering across stone walls, a faint scent of rose oil masking something darker underneath. Let's begin and drift together into a time where beauty could break you. In the medieval world, beauty began with skin. Pale, unblemished, almost ghostly white skin wasn't just a fashion, it was a declaration. It meant you were wealthy enough to stay indoors, untouched by the sun that browned the faces of peasants who labored outside. It meant purity, delicacy, and nobility. For medieval women, especially those of high status, this obsession shaped every part of their daily lives, from the food they ate to the dangerous mixtures they applied to their faces. But what it truly revealed was a world that judged beauty not by health or happiness, but by fragility and pain. Achieving that perfect pallor was no easy task. Women used mixtures that modern medicine would call deadly. Lead carbonate, vinegar, chalk, and even mercury were common ingredients in the powders and creams meant to whiten the skin. They would grind these substances finely and smooth them over their faces like a mask. The result was a soft, porcelain-like glow in candlelight, but beneath it, their skin burned, blistered, and peeled. Over time, the lead would seep into the bloodstream, causing tremors, weakness, and even madness. Yet, in a society where beauty was power, many considered this a fair trade. Paleness was so important that women went to great lengths to avoid sunlight. They stayed behind heavy curtains and wore large veils when outside. Some even painted blue veins onto their temples to enhance the illusion of thin, translucent skin. It wasn't just a style, it was a symbol of superiority. Peasants worked under the sun, their skin darkened by labor. Nobles, untouched by such work, wanted the world to see that difference immediately. To be pale was to be elevated, literally above the dirt and toil of the common world. The church, too, played its part in this fixation. Light was divine, darkness was sin. A pale face became not just beautiful, but holy, suggesting innocence and moral purity. Paintings of saints and the Virgin Mary showed their faces smooth and bright, untouched by sun or blemish. For women, especially those in noble circles, to appear pale was to align oneself with virtue and grace. Yet beneath this ideal lay a constant undercurrent of suffering. Beauty wasn't natural, it was made, maintained, and endured. Even diet played a role. Some medieval texts recommended eating light-colored foods like almonds, milk, and fish to maintain pale skin. Women avoided wine or strong spices that were said to heat the blood and darken the complexion. They bathed their faces in buttermilk, vinegar, or rose water, all in the hope of cooling and cleansing their skin. These gentle routines were often followed by the harsher ones, scrubbing with pumice stones, applying toxic masks, or even bleeding to drain the body of what physicians called excess heat. The pursuit of pale beauty also revealed class tension. While nobles sought to look untouched, peasants sometimes mocked them quietly for their unnatural appearance. A face covered in powder, lips faint and bloodless, could appear ghostly or even sickly. But within noble courts, it was the height of charm. Some women took their look further by dyeing their eyelashes and eyebrows pale to match their skin, creating a look that was almost otherworldly. To modern eyes, it might seem eerie, but in their time, it was divine. Of course, nature doesn't always obey fashion. Sunburns, freckles, and scars were common, and women turned to cosmetics to hide these imperfections. Recipes for blemish water circulated through manuscripts, many involving mixtures of eggs, vinegar, and herbs boiled together. Some even used animal fat and crushed pearls for shine. But even the most careful routine could betray them. Too much powder and their skin would crack under the heat. Too little, and the natural tone would show. Beauty was a daily battle one fought not against age, but against the elements and their own bodies. As centuries passed, the obsession with pale skin remained. It would echo through the Renaissance and beyond, carried by queens and courtiers who coated their faces with white lead, unaware of its slow poison. In the medieval mind, pale beauty was eternal beauty, and those who achieved it, even at great cost, were immortalized in art and poetry. But behind the poems and portraits lay quiet pain, the dizziness, the sores, the slow fading of vitality mistaken for elegance. So the next time you see a medieval painting of a noblewoman with her perfect white face and faint smile, remember what that look truly cost. Beneath that flawless surface was a lifetime of caution, discomfort, and quiet suffering, all for a color that the world told them was worth dying for. If the pursuit of pale skin wasn't already dangerous enough, medieval beauty demanded an even more chilling ritual, bloodletting. In the dim glow of candlelight, noble women would sit as a physician or servant placed a small knife or leech against their arm or neck. A few drops of blood would flow, sometimes more, depending on the season or the advice of the local healer. This wasn't a medical emergency. It was considered refinement. To them, letting blood wasn't only a cure for illness, it was a path to beauty, balance, and grace. The idea came from ancient medicine, passed down through the writings of Galen and Hippocrates. They believed the human body was ruled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health, and by extension, beauty, depended on keeping these in harmony. Too much blood made one too hot, leading to redness, rashes, or an unladylike flush. The cure? Remove some of that excess blood, cool the body, and restore a calm, pale complexion. It was medicine, vanity, and ritual all in one. The process itself varied. Some women used leeches, prized for their gentle precision. Others opted for a controlled cut near the wrist, temple, or even ankle. The bleeding might last several minutes, followed by rest, herbal tonics, and cool compresses. The sensation was faintly dizzying, and the results, at least temporarily, gave a soft, fragile glow, the faintness of beauty poets often praised. In truth, the women were lightheaded, weakened, and sometimes close to collapse. But that fragility was considered elegant. A woman who looked delicate was thought to be closer to divine purity. There were even specific times thought best for bloodletting. Physicians consulted charts of the moon and stars, believing cosmic balance affected the humors. Certain days were ideal for cleansing the body of excess fluids, while others were considered dangerous. Manuals advised avoiding certain veins linked to emotional imbalance or fertility. It was all part of a vast web of superstition dressed as science, and for many women, these rituals became a monthly routine. For noble women, bloodletting was more than a beauty treatment. It was a display of wealth. Only those with the leisure to rest and recover could afford to lose blood for appearance's sake. Servants and peasants, already exhausted from labor, could not afford such indulgence. To bleed voluntarily was a sign that you belonged to a higher world, untouched by work or dirt. It was both fashion and class symbol, performed quietly in the privacy of chambers, scented with herbs and oils. But the effects were cruel. Frequent bloodletting weakened the immune system, left women dizzy and pale to the point of illness, and made them prone to fainting. Some developed chronic anemia, yet that very frailty was seen as attractive. A faint woman was a gentle one, a lady in need of care. Men wrote poems about the sweet sickness of love, comparing it to the beauty of a woman weakened by passion or by her own cosmetic rituals. The culture blurred suffering and seduction into one indistinguishable image. There were, of course, skeptics. Some physicians warned that unnecessary bloodletting could unbalance the humors further, leading to melancholy or fainting spells. But many women trusted the advice of their ladies-in-waiting, herbalists, or priests more than doctors. The Church, though often condemning vanity, did not oppose bloodletting itself. It was an accepted form of purification. In monasteries and convents, both men and women practiced it as a spiritual cleansing, proving that even faith was not immune to the blade. For those who could not afford a physician, leeches became a household tool. Apothecaries sold them in jars, kept cool in basins of water. They were applied to the face, neck, or shoulders, allowed to suck until they dropped off naturally. The sensation was said to be strangely soothing, though the marks they left could last for days. Some women even claimed the leeches gave them a more fresh-faced look after the swelling subsided. Behind these rituals was the same dream that beauty could be drawn from sacrifice. In truth, it was all part of a greater illusion. The medieval world revered restraint, delicacy, and control over the body. To bleed on purpose was to show mastery over one's nature, to tame the body's passions and imperfections. But the irony was sharp. These very efforts often brought weakness, infection, and even death. The price of beauty was, as always, quietly steep. So imagine, as you drift to sleep, a noble woman in a tall, cold chamber, her face lit by a single candle. A silver bowl rests beside her, the faint shimmer of blood inside reflecting her pale face. She smiles faintly, thinking herself beautiful, lighter, pure. This was refinement. To us, it's a haunting reminder of how far people once went in the endless search for perfection. Imagine opening a polished bronze mirror in the morning light, your reflection pale and expectant. Beside you sits a collection of jars, chalky powders, fragrant oils, and a small pot of thick white paste. To the medieval woman, these were her tools of transformation. To us, they were silent killers. The beauty standards of the time demanded a perfect, luminous complexion, and one of the most prized cosmetics was a deadly blend of lead and vinegar known as Venetian cerus. What it offered in elegance, it stole in life. Venetian cerus was the crown jewel of medieval cosmetics. Imported from Italy, it was considered the purest, most refined form of face paint. Women believed it gave the skin a smooth, radiant finish unmatched by anything else. But at its core, it was lead carbonate, corroded in vinegar to create a soft white powder. This mixture was toxic from the moment it touched the skin. It entered the bloodstream slowly, poisoning the user day by day. Yet, in the dim light of castles and candlelit halls, it made faces gleam like porcelain, and that illusion was everything. Applying cerus was a delicate ritual. The thick paste would be spread over the face, neck, and chest, creating an even, mask-like layer. Some women mixed it with egg whites or honey to help it stick better and prevent cracking. Others followed it with a dusting of powdered starch or chalk for extra brightness. The look was ethereal pale, perfect, and completely unnatural. But it came at a cost. The lead slowly inflamed the skin, causing sores, blisters, and peeling. Instead of healing, women simply applied more to cover the damage, trapping themselves in a painful cycle of dependence. Over time, chronic lead poisoning revealed itself in cruel ways. Hair fell out in clumps, teeth loosened, and skin turned grayish beneath the white coating. Some women suffered tremors and fainting spells. Others went blind or lost their minds. Physicians of the time rarely understood the cause, blaming bad air or spiritual imbalance. The very makeup that made women admired in life often led them to wither in private. Yet the fashion persisted for centuries, whispered through courts, and passed from mother to daughter like an inherited secret. The obsession with lead-based beauty wasn't limited to women. Men of high status also used pale powders to even their complexion, particularly those at court who wanted to appear refined and untouched by labor. But women bore the greater pressure. To appear fresh and youthful was not merely vanity, it was survival. Marriage, influence, and respect could hinge on a woman's appearance, and so the pain was endured quietly, almost reverently. To enhance the illusion further, some added touches of color-crushed cochineal or vermilion for a hint of blush. Unfortunately, these too were dangerous. Vermilion contained mercury, another slow poison. The pursuit of beauty had become a daily dance with death, performed calmly in the name of elegance. The faint scent of vinegar and roses filled noble chambers, masking the sharp odor of metal and decay beneath. Each morning, the mask was renewed, and each night, the poison deepened. Medieval beauty guides praised such preparations as proof of refinement. To have a face so smooth, it looked like marble, was to mirror the divine perfection of angels depicted in church paintings. Artists, too, reinforced the ideal portraying women with luminous, pale faces, their features softened by light. Over time, art, religion, and vanity fused into one unbreakable belief, that whiteness was purity, and purity was beauty. No pain, it seemed, was too great to maintain that illusion. There were, of course, gentler alternatives. Some women used rice powder, ground oyster shells, or even flour to achieve a similar look. Herbalists sold safer mixtures made from milk, almond oil, or ground lily. But for the noble elite, these common ingredients were seen as inferior. True sophistication came from the imported, the costly, and the dangerous. Venetian ceruse was expensive, and its use signaled status. Ironically, it also signaled slow decay, but few dared admit that truth. As months passed, the damage could no longer be ignored. Some women developed open sores that refused to heal. Physicians recommended even harsher treatments, rubbing salt, vinegar, or even wine into the wounds, believing it would purify the flesh. In reality, it only deepened the suffering. The human face became a battlefield, and beauty a kind of armor painted on every day, covering both pride and pain. Behind every pale portrait of a medieval lady was a story of endurance. A story of someone who faced her reflection, knowing that the very thing that made her admired was also destroying her. Yet she continued, because beauty was not a choice, it was an expectation. The toxic shimmer of lead and vinegar became a quiet symbol of sacrifice, a devotion to the ideal that grace must come at a cost. As you picture these faces perfect in paintings, fragile in life, remember the irony. The glow that poets compared to moonlight was not health but harm. The paleness they praised was not innocence but exhaustion. And in that stillness, under the heavy powder and quiet pain, the medieval world's obsession with beauty found its cruelest form, a kind of slow, shining death worn proudly on the skin. In the medieval imagination, a woman's forehead was not just part of her face, It was the stage upon which grace and nobility performed. To have a high, smooth forehead was considered a sign of refinement, wisdom, and aristocratic beauty. The higher and broader the brow, the more delicate and noble the woman appeared. This peculiar obsession led to one of the strangest and most painful beauty trends of the age, the deliberate removal of hairlines and eyebrows. What we would consider mutilation, they saw as elegance. To achieve the ideal, women went to extraordinary lengths. The process usually began with the plucking or shaving of the hairline, sometimes pushed several inches back toward the crown of the head. A servant or companion might help, using small, sharp blades or tweezers made of bone or bronze. Some women even singed the edges with candle flames to prevent regrowth. It was slow, painful work. The skin would swell and redden, but a perfectly bare forehead was the reward, a blank canvas, smooth and shining under the faint light of day. Eyebrows, too, were often thinned or completely removed. A bare brow made the eyes appear larger, the forehead more expansive, and the face more heavenly. In portraits from the era, noble women often appear serene and expressionless, their foreheads long and luminous, their eyes slightly distant. The effect was ethereal, otherworldly, almost holy. But it was also unnatural, and maintaining it required constant care. Hair grows back, and for those in courtly life, every strand was an enemy to be plucked, burned, or scraped away again. Why did such a look become desirable? Much of it was tied to the symbolism of purity and intellect. A high forehead suggested not only physical beauty, but spiritual elevation. The Church's influence ran deep. Saints, angels, and the Virgin Mary were often depicted with smooth, shining foreheads, untouched by the harshness of earthly life. Artists and poets compared the foreheads of noble women to ivory or polished marble, reflecting both grace and restraint. To have a natural hairline or heavy brows was to appear coarse, earthy, and unrefined, closer to peasantry than to divinity. The rituals for maintaining this look could be excruciating. Women would rub mixtures of vinegar and quicklime along the edges of their hair to weaken the roots. Others applied herbal concoctions made from walnut shells, ashes, or crushed leeches. Some manuscripts even describe the use of hot cloths to open the pores before plucking, which did little more than increase the pain. And yet, these practices were performed calmly, as part of daily or weekly beauty routines, while music played softly or prayers were whispered to distract from the sting. Fashion amplified the trend. Headwear like hennins, the tall, conical hats often associated with medieval princesses, looked best when perched above a smooth, expansive brow. Veils and wimples framed the face in such a way that the forehead became the focal point. In noble courts, where appearance meant power, women competed subtly through the height of their hairlines and the fineness of their skin. To be seen with stray hairs peeking beneath a headdress was an embarrassment. A perfect forehead, by contrast, was a silent signal of discipline, wealth, and control. Not everyone admired the trend. Some observers quietly mocked it, noting that without brows or a natural hairline, women appeared strange and ghostly. Peasant women, unable to spend hours grooming themselves, retained their natural looks and often found the noble fashion absurd. But beauty was not about comfort, it was about status. To endure pain in pursuit of elegance was considered admirable, even virtuous. Endurance was grace, restraint was power, and the high, hairless forehead became a symbol of both. For those who couldn't afford the luxury of constant maintenance, imitation was key. A touch of powder to lighten the brow area, or a careful hairstyle to conceal the natural hairline, helped mimic the noble look. Beauty trickled down through society, reshaped at every level, but always reaching for the same unattainable ideal, one born of discomfort and discipline. The irony of the fashion was that it defied nature completely. Medieval physicians warned that removing hair could disturb the body's humors, leading to headaches or weakness, Yet women persisted. The pain became part of the performance. A noble woman's calm face was not the product of serenity, but of endurance. The absence of hair, the smoothness of the skin, and the stillness of her features all told the same story. She was in control of herself, no matter the cost. As you imagine these women now, sitting before their mirrors of polished metal, their attendants carefully plucking and trimming under the soft light of candles, picture the quiet, the slow rhythmic sound of tweezers pulling, the faint hiss of a candle, the scent of burning hair in the air. They would not flinch nor cry out. To suffer for beauty was expected. It was simply the price one paid to appear noble. When the work was done, they would rise, their foreheads gleaming like ivory, their brows faint as dust. They would glide through cold halls beneath towering ceilings, their faces serene, their pride intact. And though we might see only strangeness in their reflection, they saw perfection, an image of grace so powerful it silenced pain itself. In the medieval imagination, golden hair shimmered with meaning far beyond mere color. It was a symbol of purity, youth, and divine favor. From illuminated manuscripts to love ballads sung in echoing great halls, golden hair was praised as the mark of angels and saints, the crown of queens and maidens. Yet very few were born with it. Across much of Europe, true blonde hair was rare, especially in warmer climates where darker shades prevailed. And so began another painful pursuit, one that filled chambers with the acrid scent of chemicals and left many women weakened, scarred, or bald. The fantasy of golden hair was beautiful in art but brutal in life. To the poets of the age, golden hair was an emblem of perfection. Troubadours compared it to sunlight, to spun gold, to wheat at harvest time. In paintings, holy women like Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary were often depicted with glowing blonde tresses, even when they were known to have dark hair. The Church's imagery reinforced the ideal, and noble women sought to mirror that sanctified beauty. But the road to achieving it was paved with harsh and dangerous concoctions that stripped color, moisture, and health from the hair itself. One of the most common bleaching methods involved a mixture of lye, ashes, and vinegar, sometimes with the addition of urine, which was believed to enhance the effect. The mixture would be spread through the hair, and the woman would sit in the sun for hours, her head covered with a thin veil or hat that allowed light to reach the strands. The sun's heat activated the chemicals, lightening the hair over time. It also burned the scalp, stung the eyes, and left the hair brittle and broken. But when it worked, even a faint golden tint was enough to make the effort feel worthwhile. In Italy and France, where fashion often led the rest of Europe, women developed elaborate bleaching rituals. They would climb to rooftops or balconies during the hottest hours of the day, their hair coated in the bleaching mixture and arranged around wide, brimless hats known as solinettes. These hats were designed specifically for the process, allowing the face to stay shaded while exposing the hair to the sun. From the streets below, one might see rows of women sitting silently under the blazing sky, their hair glistening with strange potions, their skin reddening from the heat. Beauty was a quiet endurance test, endured under an indifferent sun. For those who couldn't stand the pain of chemical lightening, there were gentler if less effective alternatives. Chamomile flowers, saffron, and rhubarb were steeped in wine or vinegar and used as rinses to bring out lighter tones. Some added crushed marigold petals for a golden sheen. The results were soft and temporary, but these natural methods offered a little color without the sting. Still, for those at court, subtlety wasn't enough. They wanted brilliance hair that caught candlelight and glowed like a halo. The harsher the process, the better the result. Of course, the damage was often disastrous. Bleaching solutions burned the scalp, caused infections, and made hair fall out in handfuls. Some women resorted to wigs or hairpieces to conceal the damage, while others shaved their heads entirely and started over. Yet even baldness could be hidden beneath ornate headdresses and veils. beauty was never supposed to be effortless. The effort itself was proof of devotion to the ideal. The willingness to suffer was, in a strange way, admired. The fascination with blondness also carried darker undertones. Fair hair became a marker of social distinction, reinforcing the idea that nobility was somehow cleaner, holier, and more beautiful than those of darker complexion or hair. This was not merely fashion, but hierarchy painted in pigment and reinforced through poetry and portraiture. A golden-haired noblewoman embodied both wealth and virtue, while darker hair became associated with labor, mystery, or even temptation. The symbolism was as heavy as the chemicals they used. Some medieval physicians even believed that golden hair reflected inner purity, claiming that lighter hair meant a lighter soul. It was pseudoscience wrapped in superstition, but people believed it. Parents prayed for fair-haired children, thinking it a sign of blessing. And when nature did not oblige, artifice took over. Bleaching became not only a cosmetic choice, but an act of aspiration, a way to align oneself with divine favor and poetic perfection. Imagine the scene near dusk in a noble courtyard. Women gathered in quiet clusters, their hair stiff with drying paste, their attendants fanning them with slow, patient strokes. The smell of vinegar, ashes, and herbs mingles in the air. Somewhere nearby, a minstrel sings a song about a maiden with hair, bright as the morning sun, unaware that the very image he praises is being painfully manufactured before him. Beauty, once again, was a performance of endurance. When night finally came, the mixture was washed away with cool water or wine. Some strands might glimmer faintly gold in the candlelight. Others would remain dull, but the pursuit would continue the next day. There was always another recipe to try, another promise whispered from one lady to another in the quiet of their chambers. Each believed she might find the secret that others had not, the secret to perfect, eternal beauty. In the end, most never did. Their hair grew weaker, their scalps more tender, but still they persisted. Because to stop was to admit imperfection, to surrender to the truth that nature had denied them what society demanded. And so, under the medieval sun, women turned their pain into radiance, their suffering into shimmer, and their longing for perfection into something the poets would forever mistake for light. Beneath the perfumes, powders, and polished appearances of medieval life lingered one inescapable truth: the human body could not hide decay forever. And nowhere was that more evident than in the mouth. Teeth were more than tools. They were tiny symbols of health, class, and vitality. A pleasant smile was a mark of good breeding, while bad breath or missing teeth could ruin reputations as surely as scandal. Yet in a world without modern dentistry, the pursuit of clean, white teeth and fresh breath was a battle fought daily, often with methods that did more harm than good. For the medieval elite, a clean mouth was a mark of refinement. Manuals of etiquette advised nobles to wash their mouths every morning, to avoid strong-smelling foods like garlic or onions, and to rinse after meals with wine or vinegar. Water, considered unsafe to drink in many regions, was rarely used for cleansing. Instead, wine was thought to purify and strengthen the gums. Women chewed cloves, anise seeds, or mint leaves to sweeten their breath, sometimes mixing them with honey or powdered cinnamon. These pleasant remedies worked briefly, masking deeper problems that lay in the gums and teeth themselves. Tooth decay was common, especially among the wealthy who could afford sweets, candied fruit, and wine. Sugar had arrived in Europe by the Middle Ages, and though expensive, it was a growing indulgence. Unfortunately, no one understood its connection to tooth rot. A noble woman might present a delicate smile during a feast, her teeth coated with residue from sugared almonds, and feel the faint ache of decay beneath. When pain became unbearable, there were few options: herbal poultices, prayers, and when all else failed, extraction by force. Dentistry, as we would know it, barely existed. The job often fell to barbers or blacksmiths who possessed strong hands and sturdy tools. The process was brutal. There was no anesthesia, only courage or desperation. Teeth were yanked out with iron pliers or loosened by pounding with small chisels. Infection was common, and the damage could spread. Yet even then, the belief persisted that a well-kept mouth reflected inner virtue. To lose teeth too early was not merely painful, it was socially humiliating. To maintain a white smile, people turned to abrasive pastes made from crushed eggshells, pumice, or even powdered bone. Some added ashes, salt, or vinegar to increase their effectiveness. Brushing was done with linen cloths, chewed twigs, or fingers wrapped in rough fabric. While these mixtures might remove stains, they also stripped enamel and irritated the gums. Over time, the teeth thinned, cracked, and darkened, creating the very problem they were meant to fix. The quest for beauty, as always, ended where it began, with harm disguised as improvement. There were also strange and dangerous remedies whispered in noble courts. Some women rinsed with mixtures of wine and mercury, believing it would draw out foul humors and keep the mouth pure. Others rubbed their gums with salt and vinegar to harden them, though this often caused bleeding and sores. Herbalists prescribed rinses made from sage, rosemary, and myrrh, which at least offered some antiseptic benefit. But much of medieval oral care was guided by superstition rather than science. Breath, too, carried heavy meaning. Bad breath was not just unpleasant, it was moralized. It was said to come from corruption of the stomach or from sinful indulgence. Priests warned that foul breath could be a sign of spiritual decay, a physical manifestation of inner impurity. This made breath care both a hygienic and moral duty. To smell pleasant was to appear virtuous. To reek was to reveal weakness. Perfumed breath pastilles became popular among the wealthy small balls made from honey, musk, and herbs rolled and dried to be sucked discreetly during gatherings. For common folk, care was simpler but not always gentler. Peasants often used ashes from the hearth to scrub their teeth or rub them with salt and sage. Some chewed on fibrous roots or sticks to freshen their mouths, a practice that was surprisingly effective. But they also had less exposure to refined sugar, and their simpler diets meant fewer cavities. In this strange way, poverty protected them. The rich, surrounded by indulgence, suffered more silently. Teeth also played a symbolic role in beauty. Smooth, even teeth were rare and admired. A bright smile, when healthy, was associated with youth and charm. But laughter itself was a delicate matter. To laugh too openly was considered unrefined, especially for noblewomen. A lady was expected to smile softly, never revealing too much of her mouth. Beauty, as ever, meant restraint, control over both body and expression. Even in joy, decorum demanded discipline. Cosmetic deception was not uncommon. Some women painted their teeth with mixtures of lead and vinegar to make them appear whiter, a practice as toxic as their facial makeup. Others used powdered charcoal to darken cavities, hiding the unevenness. In portraits, artists flattered their subjects by smoothing lips and softening smiles, presenting a perfection that rarely existed in life. The image of serene, beautiful faces, lips closed, eyes calm, was not just artistic style, but necessity. Few could truly smile without revealing the toll beauty had taken. So imagine the scene. A lady in her chamber, sitting before a polished mirror. She rubs her teeth with a coarse cloth dipped in wine, her gums sore, her lips faintly trembling. She chews a clove to hide the bitterness of infection, then smooths powder onto her face to complete the illusion. In the candlelight, she is perfection fragile, pale, and composed. Yet beneath that stillness lies pain, a reminder that beauty in the medieval world demanded silence and suffering. In the end, the fear of decay was not only about teeth, but about time itself. Every ache, every stain, every missing tooth whispered that beauty could not last. And so they fought it with whatever tools they had: ashes, herbs, and poisons, believing that if they could keep smiling, the world might never see how fragile their elegance truly was. Before the tight-laced corsets of the Renaissance and the whalebone bodices of later centuries, the medieval world already had its own forms of bodily constraint girdles, laces, and bands designed to mold, flatten, or emphasize the figure beneath layers of heavy fabric. To be beautiful meant not only painting the face or bleaching the hair, but shaping the body itself into a vision that pleased society's gaze. Beneath silks and brocades, the women of the Middle Ages bore the quiet ache of compression, their breathing shallow and their movements measured. Beauty, once again, was discipline made visible. The ideal female body in medieval Europe varied by region and era, but certain themes persisted. Softness was prized. Rounded hips, a narrow waist, and a full chest suggested fertility and grace. Yet at the same time, restraint was equally admired. A perfect woman was delicate, modest, and contained. Her beauty lay in control. To achieve that balance, women relied on undergarments that both supported and restricted, creating an illusion of natural elegance that was anything but natural. The girdle, known in Latin as singulum asterisk, began as a simple belt or band of fabric tied around the waist. Over time, it became more than a functional accessory. It was a symbol of chastity, devotion, and status. Some were plain and practical, made of linen or wool, while others were richly adorned with embroidery, jewels, and silver clasps. The most luxurious girdles were given as gifts during marriages or religious ceremonies, meant to represent both beauty and virtue. Yet for many women, these belts were also a tool of control, pulling the waist tight to create a smoother, more refined silhouette. The tightness was not just symbolic. Many girdles were bound so firmly that breathing became difficult and digestion was slowed. Some were layered with additional laces or stiffened with whalebone or metal strips to maintain posture. For noble women who spent long hours sitting in courtly gatherings, these garments forced them to remain upright and composed. A slouching back or loose figure was seen as vulgar, so the body was literally shaped into obedience. Every breath, every movement, was a reminder of what beauty demanded. There were also faith-bound versions of this practice. Some women wore chastity girdles, either as a form of religious devotion or imposed upon them by jealous husbands. Though often exaggerated in later legends, certain records do describe metal or leather belts locked in place, believed to preserve purity during long absences. Whether symbolic or literal, these contraptions turned the female body into a possession guarded, confined, and silently suffering. What was called modesty was often control disguised as virtue. The materials themselves added to the discomfort. Linen and wool absorbed sweat and rubbed against the skin, causing rashes and sores. Metal clasps pinched and bruised the flesh beneath. During hot summers, the layers trapped heat. In winter, they stiffened and bit into the skin. Yet women rarely complained openly. Pain was an accepted companion to beauty, and endurance was proof of refinement. A noble woman's stillness, her calm and graceful poise, was often born from necessity. Movement risked pain, and so she learned to glide instead of stride, to speak softly, to breathe quietly. Even pregnant women were not entirely freed from this ideal. Some continued to wear looser girdles, not to shape, but to support the growing belly. Physicians recommended such bands to prevent swelling or sagging, though in truth they often restricted natural growth. The body was expected to remain as elegant as possible, even in motherhood. The natural and the artificial were always at odds, bound together beneath layers of cloth. Men, too, were not immune to this culture of compression. Knights and noblemen wore belts and doublets laced tightly to display broad shoulders and narrow waists. Their armor, though protective, also reinforced a sculpted ideal. In portraits, men appeared powerful and upright, their chests proud, their torsos lean. The body became both weapon and ornament, molded by fabric, metal, and discipline. What's most striking is how normal it all seemed. The slow squeeze of a girdle, the shallow breath beneath a gown, the ache in the ribs after hours of stillness, all were simply part of existing beautifully. In a society obsessed with appearance, the physical body was the canvas upon which virtue was painted. To endure discomfort gracefully was not seen as suffering. It was a quiet triumph, an act of will. A woman who bore her pain without complaint was admired not only for her beauty, but for her composure. As evening fell, and the heavy gowns were finally loosened, the relief must have been immense. Skin red and tender, the body expanded with the freedom to breathe again. Yet even in private, women rarely shed every layer. Modesty required restraint, even when alone. And so, they slept lightly wrapped, their bodies trained to confinement, their dreams echoing the rhythm of their breath, slow, measured, contained. When you imagine them now, picture not the glittering jewels or the fine embroidery, but the invisible pressure beneath it all. The quiet ache of ribs drawn tight, the faint tremor in the breath, the way every graceful motion was born of endurance. The medieval ideal of beauty was not softness alone. It was the mastery of pain, the art of suffering silently beneath silk and satin, smiling all the while as though it were effortless. For in that stillness, they believed, lay true elegance. In the medieval world, scent was more than a matter of hygiene. It was a matter of identity, class, and even morality. To smell pleasant was to appear civilized, virtuous, and favored by God. To smell foul was to be marked by sin, poverty, or disease. And in an age where running water was scarce and daily bathing was rare, fragrance became both camouflage and language. Perfume was power, and its trail lingered behind nobles like invisible crowns. A noble woman's chamber was a world of scent. Bowls of dried herbs hung from the rafters. Sachets of lavender and clove were tucked into garments, and smoke from burning incense curled slowly through the air. Every scent had purpose. Some masked the staleness of unwashed fabrics. Others warded off sickness or evil spirits. The church taught that pleasant smells were pleasing to God, and that foul odors were the breath of corruption itself. Thus, to anoint oneself in perfume was not merely vanity, it was an act of moral order, a way to separate oneself from the stench of mortality. But true perfume was a luxury few could afford. The ingredients ambergris from whales, musk from deer, rose oil from Damascus, and sandalwood from distant India arrived through perilous trade routes that spanned continents. Only the wealthiest could obtain such treasures. Merchants stored them in small jeweled bottles, their contents guarded like gold. A single drop could scent a cloak for days, its aroma whispering of status to everyone nearby. When a lady entered a hall, the faint trace of her perfume announced her before she spoke. In this way, smell became a kind of social weapon, gentle, invisible, and devastatingly effective. Creating perfume was both art and alchemy. Apothecaries and monks distilled oils from flowers and resins using copper alembics, mixing them with wine or vinegar to preserve the scent. Recipes varied from region to region. In France, roses and violets were favorites. In England, lavender and thyme. Some formulas included astonishing ingredients: burnt feathers, civet from wildcats, and even crushed pearls, all believed to enhance allure or longevity. These mixtures were steeped for weeks, strained through cloth, and poured into glass flasks sealed with wax. The process was slow and deliberate, mirroring the elegance of those who used them. Perfume also carried ritual meaning. In courts and cathedrals alike, incense was burned to sanctify the air, linking fragrance with holiness. Nobles imitated this practice in their own lives, perfuming not only their bodies, but their surroundings. Tapestries were sprinkled with rose water, gloves were soaked in scented oils, and even letter paper was perfumed before being sent to lovers or allies. A nobleman might recognize a lady as correspondence by scent alone, a secret signature that lingered long after words faded. The connection between scent and intimacy ran deep. Lovers exchanged pomanders, small, perforated spheres, filled with herbs and muskworn around the neck or wrist. They served both practical and romantic purposes, protecting against disease while keeping the beloved scent close. To inhale such fragrance was to feel presence, warmth, and desire. But not all perfumes were innocent. Some mixtures were designed to seduce or bewitch. Recipes for love oils appear in medieval texts, combining rose, amber, and exotic spices, sometimes mixed with drops of the user's own blood or hair. Whether these concoctions worked or not, belief in their power gave them meaning. Yet for all its beauty, perfume was also a veil over decay. Beneath the elegant aromas of noble courts lay the truth of unwashed bodies, rotting streets, and the ever-present odor of disease. Bathing was infrequent, especially in the colder months, and so perfume became a kind of illusion, a way to deny the realities of life in a world without sanitation. A sweet-smelling noble was not necessarily clean, but the illusion of purity mattered more than the fact. To smell good was to seem good, and seeming was everything. Among the poor, fragrance took humbler forms. Herbs like rosemary, sage, and mint were boiled and rubbed into hair and clothing. Smoke from juniper or pine was used to cleanse homes and ward off pests. Peasants could not afford perfume, but they too understood its power. A sprig of lavender tucked into a sleeve could comfort. A garland of thyme could protect. Even in simplicity, scent carried its quiet dignity. Religious leaders walked a fine line with perfume. Some condemned it as a gateway to vanity and sin, while others embraced its sacred associations. In monasteries, the air was thick with incense. In sermons, priests spoke of heaven as a place of divine fragrance. To smell pleasant was to be close to holiness, and so the contradiction persisted: perfume as both temptation and purity, vice and virtue intertwined. There was also danger in its ingredients. Many perfumes used toxic components like lead, arsenic, or camphor oil, absorbed slowly through the skin. Prolonged exposure caused headaches, fainting, or even hallucinations. Yet people continued to use them, enchanted by the invisible glamour they offered. To live surrounded by scent was to live in control of one's world. However, briefly to shape reality through fragrance, to conquer filth with beauty. As evening fell in great stone halls, the air grew thick with the mingling scents of wax, smoke, and rosewater. The noble guests shimmered in candlelight, their movements trailing perfume like mist. It was a world that smelled of power and decay, faith and vanity. The air itself was alive with contradictions, beautiful, poisonous, and haunting. So when you imagine the medieval night, don't picture silence alone. Picture the scent, the sweetness that hid the sickness, the roses that masked the rot, the breath of incense rising toward the rafters while life went on below, perfumed, polished, and painfully human. In the medieval world, beauty was not only something worn, it was something cultivated from within. What one ate, how much one ate, and even when one ate, all carried deep meaning. Food was moralized, spiritualized, and linked to the body's outward appearance. A soft glow, smooth skin, and graceful form were thought to come not from nature, but from discipline. To eat sparingly was to be pure, and to indulge was to risk both sin and ugliness. In this way, beauty and fasting became entwined, shaping not just bodies but souls. The medieval diet was governed by belief as much as by appetite. The church held enormous power over what and when people ate, and fasting was a regular part of life. Lent, Advent, Ember Days, and countless saints' observances meant that for nearly half the year, meat was forbidden. For most, these rules were acts of faith. But for noblewomen, fasting also became a quiet art of refinement, a way to maintain a slender figure, fair complexion, and delicate constitution. Gluttony was one of the 7 deadly sins, and restraint was not only holy but beautiful. It was widely believed that light foods produced light humors, those essential fluids that governed health and temperament. Milk, almonds, fish, and certain fruits were said to purify the blood and keep the skin pale and smooth. Heavy foods like red meat and strong wine, on the other hand, were thought to heat the body, darken the complexion, and stir dangerous passions. A noble woman who wished to appear serene and gentle avoided such fare. Her plate reflected her virtue, simple, white, and controlled. Beauty began in the stomach, and the ideal stomach was calm and nearly empty. Many women took this discipline further. Some fasted beyond religious requirement, skipping meals under the guise of piety, but truly seeking the physical results. Chronicles tell of women who ate almost nothing but bread soaked in water, or sipped weak wine flavored with herbs. Their bodies weakened, their faces thinned, and their movements became slow and ethereal. To some observers, this frailty was enchanting, a visible sign of both sanctity and beauty. The line between devotion and self-destruction blurred easily, and society admired both. Monks and priests, too, wrote of the body's relationship to the soul. To control one's hunger was to control one's desires. Women, often accused of vanity, could redeem themselves through fasting. A pure body was thought to house a pure spirit, and purity itself became attractive. Saints' lives told stories of women who survived on little more than Holy Communion, their bodies radiant, their faces glowing with divine light. To the faithful, these were miracles. To the living, they became impossible ideals. But hunger had its price. Prolonged fasting led to weakness, dizziness, and fainting. The same pallor that was praised as beautiful often came from malnutrition. Yet fainting, too, was romanticized. A delicate swoon at a feast or in a garden could be seen as a sign of refinement, of a constitution too sensitive for earthly abundance. Artists captured women with soft, drooping eyes and serene expressions, a picture of fragile grace. No one saw the quiet suffering behind the image, the hollow stomach, the trembling hands, the ache of hunger disguised as holiness. Among the wealthy, diet was also a performance of class. Peasants ate hearty grains, onions, and coarse bread to fuel their labor. Nobles, by contrast, dined on white bread, sugar, almonds, and delicate fish, foods considered pure and noble. Even the color of food mattered. Pale dishes, white cheese, milk, rice, and almonds were linked to purity and refinement, while dark or heavily spiced foods were seen as coarse. The very plate mirrored the face it was meant to nourish, light, restrained, untouched by the vulgar world. Some medieval physicians encouraged moderation for health, but their advice often echoed the same aesthetic goals. They recommended avoiding foods that heat the blood, as warmth was thought to bring redness to the skin and cloud the mind. Cool, moist foods, by contrast, were believed to calm the spirit and keep the complexion fair. A balanced body, they said, produced beauty. Imbalance produced ugliness. In practice, this meant that diet was not only medical but moral. To eat properly was to live properly and to look proper too. For the common people, fasting was rarely a choice. Scarcity itself enforced it. During harsh winters or failed harvests, food was meager, and the naturally lean bodies of peasants stood in stark contrast to the indulgence of the few. Yet even here, beauty found its way into hardship. A thin face, though born of hunger, was sometimes admired by those who never had to starve. The poor suffered what the rich imitated. In that strange symmetry, society revealed its cruelest irony. Food was also tied to sensuality and temptation. Certain dishes, ginger, honey, pepper, and cloves, were thought to inflame passion. Women were warned to avoid them if they wished to remain chaste, while men were told they could use them to arouse strength and desire. Thus, beauty and appetite became twin sins, always needing control. The perfect medieval woman was one who could deny both the hunger of the body and the hunger of the flesh. In her restraint lay her virtue, and in her virtue her beauty. Picture her at supper, seated at a long oak table while others eat heartily. Her plate remains nearly untouched, perhaps a few almonds, a sip of watered wine. She smiles faintly, serene, her hunger masked by grace. Later, in her chamber, she kneels in prayer, her body light and empty, her mind drifting between faith and exhaustion. Her reflection in the dim glass looks almost luminous, her skin pale, her eyes soft. To the world, she is the image of perfection. To herself, she is barely there. And so it was that medieval beauty extended beyond the mirror and into the soul. It was not merely seen, it was endured. Every hunger pang was a step closer to purity, every fainting spell a mark of divine favor. In a time when indulgence was sin and suffering was sacred, beauty was born not from abundance, but from the quiet, trembling art of denial. In medieval Europe, faith ruled not only the soul, but the mirror. The church was the heart of daily life, shaping laws, customs, and the very way people thought about themselves. Beauty, though celebrated in art and poetry, lived in constant tension with religion. The same priests who praised the divine beauty of saints also warned that vanity was a sin, a trap set by the devil to lure souls away from salvation. For medieval women especially, this contradiction was inescapable. To be lovely was to risk damnation, yet to neglect appearance was to invite scorn. Between holiness and vanity stretched a fragile, uneasy path. From the pulpit, sermons thundered against cosmetics, perfumes, and fine clothing. Preachers warned that these were marks of pride, the deadliest of sins. They quoted St. Augustine, who said that adornment corrupted the soul, and Tertullian, who called painted faces the devil's handwriting. Women were urged to show humility in dress, to avoid distracting men from their spiritual duties, and to let their inner virtue shine instead of their skin. But these teachings clashed sharply with the realities of court life, where beauty was not just admired, it was expected. The church could condemn vanity all it wanted. Power still demanded polish. Confession manuals from the period revealed just how deeply these anxieties ran. Women were encouraged to confess not only lies or envy, but also excessive grooming. Some priests questioned women about how long they spent in front of a mirror, or whether they used powders to lighten their skin. Even the act of braiding one's hair could be judged sinful if done for the sake of admiration rather than cleanliness. The soul, they said, should be adorned, not the flesh. Yet the more the church condemned beauty, the more powerful its allure became. There was also a gendered cruelty in these teachings. Men were allowed certain expressions of refinement, well-tailored tunics, scented oils, polished armor without spiritual suspicion. Women, however, were seen as inherently tempting, their beauty dangerous by nature. A painted face could cause men to fall into sin, priests warned, and thus women bore moral responsibility for the desires of others. The logic was harsh. If a man's thoughts strayed, the fault lay not in his heart, but in her rouge. Still, hypocrisy thrived in the shadows of holy buildings. In monasteries and convents, nuns prepared their own herbal balms and tonics, ostensibly for health, but often admired for the glow they produced. Some used rosewater, honey, and beeswax to soften their skin, claiming it as protection against the cold. Others perfumed their veils or robes with lavender to ward off illness. Beneath vows of poverty, there was still a quiet desire for beauty, for comfort, for dignity, for selfhood. Even within walls of faith, the mirror never fully disappeared. Art complicated things further. The church itself commissioned paintings and sculptures filled with beauty. Angels, saints, and the Virgin Mary were depicted with perfect features and luminous skin. Cathedrals glowed with stained glass that bathed holy faces in radiant light. If beauty was sinful, then heaven itself seemed full of it. Theologians tried to explain this paradox by saying divine beauty was different. It reflected God's perfection, not human pride. But for ordinary believers, the line between holy and worldly beauty was blurred. They saw splendor in churches and sought to mirror it, if only faintly, in their own lives. The church's attitude toward adornment shifted over time. During the High Middle Ages, some clerics softened their stance, arguing that modest decoration was acceptable if it honored God. A woman who wore fine clothes to church, they reasoned, might be showing respect, not vanity. The intent mattered as much as the act. Yet this reasoning was slippery. Intent could not be seen, only appearance could. And so, judgment continued, quiet but relentless. Among the laity, people found ways to reconcile faith and beauty. Some prayed before their mirrors, asking God to bless their efforts. Others wore crosses or holy charms alongside their jewels, blending piety with polish. For them, beauty was not a rebellion against faith, but an extension of it, a way to honor the Creator by caring for His creation. This belief, though quietly radical, offered a kind of peace between body and soul. It allowed them to be human in a world that demanded they be angels. The church also used fear to enforce control. Tales spread of women who died in vanity, those who spent too long before mirrors or used forbidden cosmetics, only to be struck down by illness as punishment. Some legends claimed that when such women were buried, their faces blackened in the grave, proof of divine wrath. Whether true or not, these stories haunted imaginations and reinforced obedience. To beautify oneself was to walk a dangerous line between admiration and eternal suffering. And yet, beauty remained irresistible. The same priests who preached against painted faces often found themselves moved by them. Court poets who wrote hymns to God also wrote verses praising the shimmer of a lady's eyes. Artists continued to carve smooth marble bodies and paint luminous skin in scenes of devotion. Even within monasteries, monks wrote ecstatic descriptions of beauty as a reflection of divine order. In the end, faith and vanity were never enemies. They were intertwined, feeding each other's fire. As night fell in the great cathedrals, the air thick with incense, and candlelight, worshippers would gaze at the statues of saints, their faces serene, their robes gilded with gold leaf. Outside, noblewomen would walk home, veiled and powdered, smelling faintly of rosewater, praying under their breath that God might forgive them for wanting to be lovely. Between holiness and hunger for beauty lay a fragile truce, a silence that neither church nor vanity could quite break. And in that silence, the medieval woman lived her contradiction. Saint and sinner, pious and painted, seeking grace in the reflection of her own face. Though much of the medieval obsession with beauty centered on women, men, too, were bound by its quiet expectations. A man's appearance spoke of his rank, his honor, and his worth long before he ever spoke a word. Knights, courtiers, and scholars alike shaped their bodies and faces to reflect ideals of strength, dignity, and divine order. Masculine beauty was not only a matter of pride, it was a symbol of control. To look composed was to appear virtuous. To look powerful was to appear chosen by God. Unlike women, men were not expected to be delicate, yet their grooming was far from careless. A knight's face was to be clean, his hair well trimmed, and his clothing orderly. Dirt and disarray were signs of weakness or savagery. Chroniclers often described noblemen in glowing terms: broad of shoulder, straight of limb, fair of hair, and clear of skin. These descriptions were more than flattery. They defined what it meant to be noble. The ideal man was both warrior and gentleman, fierce in battle, yet refined in court. His body, like his armor, was to gleam without blemish. Hair played a central role in this image. Medieval men took great care with it, and hairstyles often reflected social status. In some courts, shoulder-length hair was fashionable, brushed and scented with oils of rosemary or lavender. In others, shorter hair symbolized discipline and piety. Barbers were important figures, trimming not only hair, but beards, mustaches, and even eyebrows. Smoothness was prized among young courtiers. Too much beard was seen as rough or unrefined, while older men wore neatly shaped facial hair to signal wisdom and authority. To look wild was to appear base or pagan, a danger to civilized order. Clothing further defined the masculine ideal. Fabrics were rich but tailored for movement. Tight hose showed muscular legs, while doublets emphasized the chest and waist. In later medieval fashion, padded shoulders and fitted sleeves exaggerated masculine form, mirroring the armor of knights. Colors, too, carried meaning. Deep reds and blues symbolized strength and loyalty. Gold and silver hinted at wealth and divine favor. A well-dressed man was a statement of stability. His control over his appearance reflected his control over his world. Cleanliness was also tied to masculine virtue. Though bathing was infrequent by modern standards, noblemen bathed more often than peasants and used scented waters to wash their hands and faces. Manuals of chivalry encouraged such habits, linking bodily order to spiritual order. A knight who kept his body neat was thought to keep his conscience neat as well. His grooming was a reflection of discipline, and discipline was the root of all virtue. Even the smallest gesture, washing before meals, keeping nails trimmed, or brushing teeth with wine and ashes, was a mark of breeding. The link between appearance and morality was deeply entrenched. Chroniclers described good kings and heroes as handsome, their beauty evidence of divine favor. Ugliness, by contrast, was often portrayed as a sign of corruption or inner vice. A fair face meant a fair soul, a twisted one, a wicked heart. Such beliefs gave appearance immense power. Men judged and were judged not only by what they did, but by how they looked doing it. The mirror became a silent confessor, and the face a map of character. Perfume and adornment, though more restrained than for women, still played a role. Wealthy men wore perfumed gloves, scented their beards, or carried pomanders filled with herbs to ward off unpleasant odors. They polished their armor to a mirror shine and fastened jeweled brooches to their cloaks. Such gestures were not mere vanity, they were strategic. In the echoing halls of power, scent and shimmer spoke louder than words. To smell clean, to shine bright, to look composed, these were forms of language understood by all. Even the concept of beauty itself was deeply gendered. Where female beauty was fragile, soft, and passive, male beauty was structured, steady, and commanding. A man's hands should be strong but not rough, his face stern but not cruel, his movements deliberate. Grace in a man was measured, never excessive. Too much softness risked mockery. Too little grace risked barbarity. In between lay the perfect balance, the knight who could strike with precision, yet bow with elegance, the scholar who could recite poetry, yet command attention in silence. Of course, not all men lived by these ideals. Peasants and laborers had no time for scented oils or tailored tunics. Their beauty, if noticed at all, was of endurance. The rough hands, the sun-darkened skin, the strength of necessity. Yet even among the common folk, appearance mattered. A man who looked clean, who stood straight and spoke clearly, was respected. A man who appeared lazy or unkempt was mistrusted. Across all classes, beauty was a form of order, a visible sign of how one belonged or didn't belong in the grand structure of medieval life. For some men, beauty also carried danger. The church warned against vanity in men as well, especially those who spent too much time grooming or adorning themselves. Such habits were seen as feminine or sinful, distractions from the humility demanded by God. Monks shaved their heads in tonsure to renounce worldly pride, their bare crowns a reminder that holiness began where vanity ended. Yet even in monasteries, men were not immune to self-consciousness. Clean robes, smooth skin, and orderly posture were still quietly admired. And in the courts of love, the poetic gatherings that celebrated chivalry and romance, appearance became theater. Men wooed not only with words, but with image. A shining knight on horseback, his cloak rippling in the wind, was as much a symbol as a person. Every detail, the glint of his armor, the way his hair caught the light, was crafted to impress. Beauty was performance, and performance was power. Picture a nobleman at dawn, preparing for court. His servant brings water, scented with thyme for washing. He shaves carefully, combs his hair, and smooths his tunic. A ring gleams on his finger, his boots polished to dark gloss. When he steps into the hall, the air shifts, his presence commands it. No words are needed. His beauty, composed and deliberate, speaks the silent language of authority. In the end, medieval masculine beauty was a mirror of its world, rigid, hierarchical, and full of contradiction. Men were expected to be both humble and magnificent, modest yet admired. They were the embodiment of power restrained, a living symbol of the balance between strength and grace. And though the centuries have changed the fashions, the expectation remains familiar, that even in stillness, beauty must always mean control. In medieval Europe, the head was a canvas for status, piety, and fashion. A woman's headdress was not just an accessory, it was a declaration. The taller, heavier, and more elaborate it was, the greater her station appeared. From veils and wimples to hennins and elaborate nets of pearls, headwear transformed the body into a living sculpture. But beneath the silk and gold thread lay the unseen toll. Pressure headaches, neck strain, and the endless discomfort of wearing one's rank upon one's skull. To be admired was to suffer silently, the weight of beauty pressing down, quite literally, upon the head. In early medieval times, women's hair was often covered out of modesty. The church taught that a woman's hair was a source of temptation, a sign of vanity and sin. Married women, in particular, were expected to keep their hair veiled in public. The wimple, a cloth wrapped tightly around the neck and chin, sometimes covering the cheeks, became the standard of respectability. It was hot, suffocating, and restrictive, but it marked a woman as virtuous and obedient. To appear unveiled, especially in church or in the presence of men, could spark gossip or even condemnation. As fashion evolved, modesty met extravagance. The simple wimple gave way to complex headdresses that combined cloth, wire, and jewels into towering displays of wealth. In noble courts, the hennin emerged, the iconic cone-shaped hat often associated with princesses and fairy tales. These hats could rise over a foot high, their frames built from wire and stiffened linen, draped with fine veils of silk or gauze. The weight alone could make a woman's neck ache after an hour. Walking through narrow castle corridors, she had to duck beneath doorframes to avoid striking the ceiling. Yet when she entered a hall, all eyes turned upward. Her discomfort was invisible beneath the shimmer of her veil. Every region had its variation. In England, padded rolls called bourrelets framed the face, sometimes adorned with pearls or gold thread. In France, horned headdresses swept outward like wings, defying balance and gravity alike. German fashions favored intricate nets of braided hair and metal filigree, while Italian women wore soft veils pinned with jeweled combs. Each design had its meaning, its social weight. A woman's headdress told others her wealth, her marital status, even her moral standing. Simplicity was expected of widows and nuns. Extravagance belonged to the living symbols of luxury, the noble women. The daily routine of preparing these headdresses was a ritual of patience. Hair had to be combed, oiled, and braided tightly to fit beneath the structure. Servants spent hours pinning cloth and wire into place, ensuring that no stray hair escaped. Some women used lard or wax to smooth flyaways. Their hair hardened into shape beneath the fabric. Others sewed fine ribbons into their braids, never meant to be seen, simply to hold the elaborate framework steady. The slightest shift could ruin the symmetry, and so every movement had to be slow, deliberate, and graceful. Beauty demanded stillness. The discomfort was constant. The wimple constricted breathing. The hennin strained the neck. The pressure of pins left red marks on the scalp, and the heavy veils trapped heat around the face. During summer, the sweat beneath the fabric itched and stung, but to scratch or adjust in public was unthinkable. A noble woman had to endure with serenity. Pain became part of her posture. The higher her headdress, the more she was admired for her poise. The silence of suffering was itself a sign of refinement. There are also symbolic meanings layered into these styles. The covered head represented virtue and obedience, aligning women with the Virgin Mary, but the taller and grander designs whispered of pride and vanity. The Church condemned the hennin as sinful excess, claiming that such headpieces lifted the soul toward arrogance. Preachers mocked noble women for chasing fashion over faith, warning that the weight of their headdresses on earth would drag their souls down in the afterlife. Yet despite these scoldings, the trend only grew. Even in the shadow of the cathedral, fashion defied fear. The care of these garments extended beyond wearing. The fine silks and delicate veils had to be kept spotless. Perfumed sachets were tucked into the folds to prevent odors. When traveling, women carried boxes just for their headdresses, lined with soft fabric to prevent creases. Some noble households had dedicated rooms for storing these creations, each one a fragile piece of art. A torn veil or bent wire could ruin weeks of labor. Maintaining beauty was not a moment's act, it was a full occupation. For peasants, of course, such extravagance was unimaginable. Their head coverings were simple scarves, linen caps, or rough veils to protect from dust and sun. But even among the poor, the head remained symbolic. A clean, tied kerchief or simple braid could still convey dignity. The difference between peasant and noble was not whether one covered her hair, but how much pain she endured to do so. Men also adopted distinctive headgear to display rank. Knights wore coifs and padded hoods under their armor, while nobles sported tall hats, fur-lined caps, or embroidered chaperons that wound around the head like serpents of fabric. Though less torturous than women's fashions, these too carried meaning. A man's hat indicated his wealth and worldliness. A bare head in the wrong company could be an insult. The higher one stood in class, the more one's head was adorned, as though height itself conferred authority. When evening came, and the grand headdresses were finally removed, the relief must have been immense. The scalp throbbed from pressure, the hair clung damp with sweat, and the neck muscles ached from strain. The illusion of beauty dissolved into tenderness and exhaustion. Servants brushed the hair gently, massaging the sore skin beneath. Yet even then, a woman could not fully escape the weight. Tomorrow, the performance would begin again. Picture her in the dim light of her chamber, the hennin resting on its stand beside the bed, the fine veil folded carefully over it. Her hair, released from hours of tight braiding, falls unevenly down her shoulders. She sits in silence, rubbing her temples, her reflection soft in the candlelight. The elegance the world saw was never effortless. It was constructed, heavy, and full of ache. The beauty of the medieval head was not born of freedom, but of burden. It was the crown of patience worn by those who suffered gracefully for the privilege of being seen. When we imagine the Middle Ages, we often picture grime streets filled with mud, smoke clinging to walls, and people unwashed for months. But the truth, as always, was more complicated. Cleanliness was deeply valued, but not in the way we understand it today. To the medieval mind, bathing was not merely about removing dirt. It was about balance, health, and morality. The clean body reflected a clean soul, but too much concern for cleanliness could signal vanity or sin. And so, between superstition and desire, the people of medieval Europe created a strange dance with water, both drawn to it and afraid of it, cleansing the body while never quite washing it clean. In the early medieval period, bathing was surprisingly common. Public bathhouses stood in towns and cities across Europe, descendants of Roman baths that had once served as social and hygienic centers. There, men and women soaked in heated pools, discussed politics, and conducted business. For many, it was a rare comfort in a hard world. But over time, as the church gained authority and disease spread through the population, these public baths became places of suspicion. They were associated with sin, with moral decay, and later, with plague. By the late Middle Ages, bathing had retreated from public view, becoming something private, rare, and symbolic. The church's influence shaped how people thought about washing. Modesty discouraged undressing, even for cleanliness. Priests warned that excessive bathing could tempt the flesh, opening both pores and passions. The body, they said, should be cleansed by prayer more than by water. Still, some forms of washing were allowed, even encouraged. Hands and faces were rinsed daily, especially before prayer or meals. To wash before approaching God or food was a sign of respect, but full-body bathing was another matter. It required privacy, warmth, and time luxuries few could afford. Among the wealthy, however, bathing never truly disappeared. Noble households had wooden tubs lined with linen and filled with heated water scented with herbs like rosemary, mint, or lavender. Servants poured the water with jugs, ensuring the temperature remained comfortable. The bather might sip wine or be fanned while soaking, surrounded by candles and perfume. This was not the frantic scrub of modern hygiene. It was slow, indulgent, and ritualized. Some women bathed to relax, others to soften their skin or soothe ailments. Doctors prescribed baths for melancholy or fatigue, though they cautioned that too much water might weaken the humors. The poor could only dream of such luxury. Their baths came rarely, in rivers, ponds, or wooden barrels shared by the family. Water was cold, soap was scarce, and modesty was strict. Yet even peasants took pride in simple cleanliness, washing their hands and faces before church, combing their hair, changing linen when possible. A clean shirt, freshly aired in the sun, was as good as a bath. Linen, in fact, became a kind of substitute for washing. It absorbed sweat and oils, and regular changing of clothes was thought to cleanse the body indirectly. In a world where water could be both healing and harmful, linen was the barrier between purity and decay. Soap, when available, was a mix of animal fat and lye harsh, caustic, and often scented with herbs to mask its bite. Wealthy families imported fine soap from Castile, smoother and gentler than the coarse local kind. For many, however, simple scrubbing with ashes or sand sufficed. People perfumed their clothes and bodies with rose water or vinegar to mask odors, especially in crowded towns where sewage ran openly in the streets. Cleanliness was not the absence of smell, but the presence of a better one. The plague changed everything. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 14th century, doctors warned that bathing opened the skin's pores, allowing disease to enter. Fear of infection turned water into a threat. People avoided full baths for years at a time, relying instead on perfumes, powders, and frequent changes of linen. Bathhouses closed, and the association between bathing and sighing deepened. Yet ironically, nobles continued to sit in perfumed tubs, claiming that steam purified the air. Cleanliness had become a paradox, both protection and danger, virtue and vice. Even without frequent bathing, people found ways to appear fresh. They sprinkled themselves with floral waters, dusted their bodies with powders made from ground iris roots or rice, and burned aromatic herbs to scent their rooms. Hands were washed after meals, faces wiped with cloths soaked in wine or vinegar. Hair was combed and braided tightly to avoid lice, and clothes were smoked over juniper or rosemary fires to kill pests. The goal was not sterility, but composure. To look and smell pleasant was to appear orderly, and order was beauty. In monasteries, bathing took on spiritual symbolism. Monks washed before prayer and during holy festivals, viewing the act as a form of purification. Yet even there, moderation ruled. To wash too often was to indulge in comfort. The ideal monk was clean enough to serve God, but not so clean as to forget humility. The balance was delicate. Enough water for health, not enough for pride. For women, bathing was particularly fraught. A naked body invited suspicion. Manuals warned against bathing alone or in mixed company, and women who visited public baths risked gossip about their virtue. Still, some braved it. For them, bathing was an act of quiet rebellion, a moment of peace and warmth in lives often defined by restraint. The scent of lavender in the air, the sound of water against wood, it was as close as one could come to freedom. Imagine such a moment, a noblewoman seated in her wooden tub, veils and jewels set aside, steam curling through her chamber. Servants pour warm water scented with mint, and the flicker of candlelight dances on the surface. For once, the mask of beauty, the powders, the paint, the tight laces is washed away. For a brief hour, she is simply herself, breathing freely. Outside, the world remains harsh and cold, but inside this circle of warmth, there is quiet. Yet when the bath is done, the layers return. The powders, the perfumes, the linen. Cleanliness, in the medieval world, was not about water, but illusion. To appear clean was enough. To smell pleasant was divine. And in that illusion, beauty lived comfortably between truth and pretense, the skin forever caught between what it hid and what it longed to reveal. Long before mirrors became common, beauty in the medieval world was reflected not by glass, but by art. Painters, poets, and sculptors defined what was considered beautiful, shaping how men and women saw themselves for centuries. In monasteries, courts, and cathedrals, art was not merely decoration, it was instruction. Every curve of a painted cheek, every delicate hand carved in marble, told people what to desire, what to envy, and what to fear. The idea of beauty lived in these works, idealized and eternal, while the real bodies that inspired them faded in silence. In the beginning, art was not made for vanity. Early medieval art was devotional, focused on the sacred rather than the sensual. The beauty of a saint was meant to reflect the beauty of God. Faces were stylized, not realistic, oval and serene, untouched by expression. A pale face, smooth and luminous, represented purity of soul, while symmetry reflected divine order. Artists avoided shadows and imperfections. Their subjects were not human, but heavenly. Even the Virgin Mary, depicted again and again, was painted with the same flawless features: gentle eyes, high brow, and skin pale as ivory. Over time, these images shaped the real expectations of beauty, merging holiness with appearance. As centuries passed, art began to breathe again. The Gothic and early Renaissance styles brought life and emotion back into faces. Painters began to observe the world more closely, though always through the lens of faith. They softened lines, played with light, and captured the faint blush of a cheek or the curve of a lip. Yet even as art grew more human, the standards it created became more demanding. The ideal woman was still pale, slender, and serene. Her beauty was not passion, but patience, a body sculpted for devotion rather than desire. To smile too widely or to show strength was to break the illusion. The church and nobility both reinforced this quiet image. Kings and queens commissioned portraits not to reveal themselves, but to perfect themselves. Artists were instructed to soften wrinkles, straighten noses, and lighten complexions. Every flaw was erased. The result was not likeness, but legend. To be painted was to become an idea rather than a person, a face that never aged, never spoke, never defied. The canvas was eternity, and beauty was its only law. Color, too, carried meaning. Pale skin and golden hair symbolized virtue, red lips, passion, dark tones, mystery, or danger. Artists used these associations deliberately. A noblewoman's portrait might glow with delicate light tones, while a temptress in a moral painting would be cast in shadow. The visual language of beauty became moral language, teaching viewers not just what was lovely, but what was good. The more divine one looked, the more one was assumed to be pure. And so, beauty became a form of proof. Poets played their part as well. Troubadours and courtly writers filled the air with verses praising eyes like stars, skin like snow, and hair like spun gold. They compared women to flowers, angels, and moonlight. These poems were often written for wealthy patrons in noble courts, where flattery was both art and currency. To be described by a poet was to be immortalized, even if only as a symbol. The word spread ideals far faster than paintings could, shaping how love and beauty were imagined in every corner of Europe. Men began to measure desire against verse, and women measured themselves against words that no human could truly match. Sculptors followed suit. In stone and marble, they captured smoothness, symmetry, and silence. Their figures stood frozen in perfect calm, their garments flowing like water, their faces soft and without strain. The weight of the world never touched them. Even when they depicted sorrow, like the Virgin mourning her son, the pain was quiet, dignified, and beautiful. Real suffering had no place in beauty. The medieval eye demanded serenity, a world where emotion was tamed and control was grace. Yet behind every work of art lay human truth. The painters who mixed their pigments with lead and egg yolk worked by candlelight in cold workshops. The models who sat for portraits, often noble women, sometimes servants, endured hours of stillness, their bodies stiff, their eyes unfocused. The sculptures that adorned cathedrals were carved by calloused hands, their makers anonymous. The very art that defined perfection was born from imperfection, from sweat and labor and fatigue. Beauty, like holiness, was built upon suffering. The influence of these artistic ideals reached far beyond the walls of churches and palaces. They shaped fashion, behavior, and even medicine. Women applied white powders to match the skin tones of painted Madonnas. Men trained their expressions to remain calm and noble, like the figures carved into cathedral facades. Artists did not simply capture beauty. They created it, codified it, and set it loose upon society as something both to worship and to fear. And yet, in this rigid world of perfection, there was something tender in how people looked at art. In the quiet of a chapel, a peasant woman might gaze upon the face of a saint and see hope, not vanity. In a castle hall, a nobleman might look upon a portrait of his wife and feel affection, not pride. Art was not only tyranny, it was comfort. It gave people a glimpse of harmony in a world filled with pain. Even when the standards it set were impossible, the longing they inspired was deeply human. Picture, for a moment, a small chapel at dusk. A painting of the Virgin glows softly by candlelight, her face calm, her eyes downcast. A woman kneels before her, weary from the day, her own face roughened by time and work. She prays, and in that stillness, she sees a reflection of herself, not in the flawless features, but in the quiet endurance behind them. The art that was meant to command becomes a mirror of understanding. In that moment, beauty is no longer an ideal to chase, but a stillness to rest in. The artist, the subject, and the viewer all become part of one silent truth, the longing to be seen as worthy, as good, as whole. And so, through the eyes of medieval art, beauty became something both unreachable and deeply familiar, a bridge between heaven and earth, painted one gentle brushstroke at a time. In a time before medicine understood age or decay, people still feared them deeply. To grow old was not only to lose health, it was to lose status, beauty, and favor. In the medieval imagination, youth was light, grace, and divine vitality, while age was shadow and decline. And so, among nobles and commoners alike, there arose an obsession with finding the secret to lasting youth. It was an era that blended superstition with desperation, giving birth to 1,000 potions, powders, and elixirs of youth, that promised to restore what time had taken away. But behind their sweet scents and golden bottles, most were poison disguised as hope. Physicians and alchemists claimed to hold ancient knowledge recipes passed down from Greek scholars, Arabic healers, and whispered legends of the East. Some of these mixtures were sold in crowded markets, others brewed privately in castle chambers by those who could afford the ingredients. Honey, milk, rosewater, and crushed pearls were common bases, mixed with herbs thought to purify the blood and renew the flesh. But alongside these harmless components came far more dangerous additions: mercury, arsenic, lead, sulfur, and even powdered bone. Beauty was a delicate balance between remedy and ruin. One of the most popular treatments was the aqua mirabilis, or wonder water. It was a distilled concoction of alcohol, herbs, and sometimes metals, believed to cleanse impurities from the skin and sharpen the senses. Applied to the face, it promised to remove wrinkles and revive youth's bloom. In truth, it often burned the skin raw. Women, desperate to preserve their delicate appearance, dabbed it daily, ignoring the redness that followed. To suffer a little was to prove devotion to beauty. After all, what was pain compared to time? Mercury, drawn from cinnabar and used by alchemists in their search for gold, became a sinister ingredient in beauty recipes. It was thought to awaken the blood and make the skin glow. Physicians advised mixing it with vinegar or egg whites to form a shining cream. Women rubbed it over their faces before sleep, trusting in its power to smooth and tighten. But mercury does not heal, it poisons. Slowly, invisibly, it seeps into the body, trembling hands, clouding thoughts, and dimming sight. Many noble women, praised for their radiant complexions, were in truth quietly dying of the very elixirs meant to preserve them. There were gentler remedies, too, at least in appearance. Milk baths, made famous in later centuries, had their roots here. Medieval texts praised donkey's milk for softening the skin and giving it a youthful sheen. Wealthy women filled tubs with warm milk mixed with rose petals or honey, soaking for hours while servants replaced the cooling liquid. It was luxurious, soothing, and mostly harmless. But for most, such indulgence was unattainable. Peasants relied on simpler folk cures, rinsing their faces with rainwater, applying mashed herbs, or rubbing their skin with oil and ashes. Even these humble rituals carried the same dream to look young, to feel alive, to hold on to something that slipped away too fast. The church, ever watchful, warned against vanity disguised as medicine. To chase eternal youth, they said, was to challenge God's will. Aging was part of divine design, a reminder of humility and mortality. But even priests used their own preserving tonics, usually wine steeped with herbs like sage and rosemary. They called it fortifying the spirit. Everyone, it seemed, sought some small comfort against the creeping shadow of age. Alchemists, meanwhile, pursued a grander vision, the philosopher's stone, said to grant eternal life and restore youth to the old. Though most sought it for wealth, many believed in its power to transform the human body as well as metal. They toiled in smoky workshops, mixing sulfur, mercury, and salt, believing that if these elements could be perfected, so too could the flesh. The dream of alchemy was not greed alone, it was the refusal to accept decay. And while few ever claimed success, their experiments often spilled into the world of cosmetics, birthing new miracle tonics that promised beauty beyond nature's limits. One such formula was white water, made from distilled lead, soaked in vinegar for days until it turned milky and thick. It whitened the skin immediately, covering spots and scars. But it also entered the pores, poisoning the blood. Those who used it appeared beautiful for a time, until their faces blistered and their health crumbled. Even then, many refused to stop. They believed that stopping would cause the illusion to fade faster, and so they continued, painting poison over poison, layer upon layer, until the mirror showed only ghostly perfection, Men were not immune to these pursuits. Noblemen and scholars alike sought potions to maintain their vigor and clarity. Some drank youth wines infused with gold leaf, believing that metal carried vitality from the earth itself. Others consumed mixtures of crushed gemstones, coral or ground deer, antler luxurious, useless, and often deadly. Still others turned to aphrodisiacs made from strange ingredients, snake blood, oysters, or powdered herbs meant to awaken manly fire. The pursuit of eternal youth blurred easily into the pursuit of virility, and in both, folly found its richest soil. Even among commoners, superstition thrived. Old women sold secret salves at marketplaces, claiming they had learned them from fairies or forest spirits. Some whispered of moonlight tonics that could freeze the face in youth if gathered under certain stars. Others brewed teas of dandelion, nettle, or marjoram to cleanse the years from the body. Most of these did nothing, but they gave comfort, a small defiance against the passage of time. Imagine then a noble woman seated before her mirror at dusk. On her table stand jars of white powder, bottles of rosewater, and a small vial of silvery liquid that gleams in the lamplight. Her maid stirs the mixture gently, dipping a soft cloth into it. The scent is sweet, almost metallic. She dabs it onto her face, feeling the faint burn spread across her skin. Tomorrow, her reflection will look smoother, brighter. She will smile faintly, pleased. What she will not know is that each touch steals a little more of her strength, each glow another breath of her life. Yet she will keep using it, because to stop would mean facing the truth. That beauty fades, and that all the perfumes and powders in the world cannot stop the quiet, steady march of time. The medieval search for youth was never really about vanity alone. It was about the fear of death, of invisibility, of being forgotten. Beneath the alchemist's experiments and the lady's nightly rituals lay the same longing, to remain seen, loved, and alive. The elixirs they made could not save them, but they tell us something enduring about the human heart. Even surrounded by faith and ritual, even knowing the soul was eternal, they could not stop longing for a few more years of beauty, a few more nights of admiration. And perhaps that longing, more than any potion, is what truly kept them alive in memory. Far from the castles and candlelit chambers of nobility, the peasants of medieval Europe lived lives shaped by earth, weather, and work. Their days began before dawn and ended long after the sun fell. They plowed fields, milked cows, mended clothes, and tended fires. Yet even in these rough and simple lives, beauty found a quiet place. It was not the powdered, painted beauty of the noble courts, but something humbler rooted in nature, necessity, and small acts of self-care that gave dignity to lives of hardship. While nobles poisoned their skin with lead and crushed pearls, peasants looked to herbs, sun, and earth to stay clean, fragrant, and human. Peasant beauty was practical. Their routines were shaped by what they had: water from the well or stream, herbs from the hedgerow, and oils rendered from animal fat or pressed from seeds. Bathing was rare but not unheard of. A quick wash at the end of the week, often in wooden tubs shared by the family, was common enough. Soap, when it could be found, was rough and handmade, boiled from ashes and fat, sometimes scented faintly with lavender or mint gathered from the fields. For most, it was used sparingly. Water was precious, and warmth was work. A full bath was an occasion, not a habit. Hair care was simpler still. Women brushed their hair with wooden combs or fingers, often rubbing a bit of oil through it to keep it soft. Lard mixed with herbs might be used to smooth frizz or protect against lice. In summer, they washed their hair in streams, using ash or crushed soapwort, a flowering plant that lathered naturally when rubbed in water. Men, too, kept their hair trimmed with knives or burned at the ends to prevent tangling. Beards were common, but rarely unkempt. Even the poorest man understood that a clean face and tidy hair could earn respect in the village. A peasant's beauty was less about allure and more about decency. Clothing, though coarse, carried its own kind of elegance. Freshly laundered linen shirts and wool dresses smelled of sun and wind. People prized the feeling of clean linen against their skin. It was their substitute for frequent bathing. On feast days or church mornings, garments were brushed, patched, and perfumed with herbs. Women sometimes rubbed their clothes with crushed flowers or dried rosemary to give them a pleasant scent. In a world where poverty was inescapable, these small gestures became a source of quiet pride. A clean shirt, a brushed braid, a sprig of greenery pinned to a tunic, these were the medieval peasant's jewels. For the skin, there were simple remedies. Sun and wind left faces chapped and rough, so people softened their skin with animal fat, butter, or beeswax. Women often rubbed their cheeks with beetroot juice or rose petals for a touch of color, mimicking the rosy flush of health. Some used oat flour or milk to soothe irritation from cold weather. These methods worked because they came from the land itself. Unlike the nobles' toxic cosmetics, peasant treatments were mild, natural, and often passed down through generations by word of mouth. What they lacked in refinement, they made up for in wisdom. Scent, too, held importance, even among the poor. Farmers and shepherds were surrounded by the smells of their work hay, sweat, smoke, and soil. But herbs grew everywhere, and peasants used them freely. A handful of mint rubbed between the palms could freshen breath. A sprig of thyme or marjoram could be tucked into the hair or worn around the neck. Some burned dried sage to cleanse the air inside their homes or scattered flowers on the floor to mask the odor of livestock. It was a simple form of perfume, one born not from luxury but from love of life's small comforts. Unlike nobles, peasants had little time for mirrors. Their reflections appeared only in still water or polished metal. Beauty, therefore, was felt more than seen. A woman's pride came from her skill and grace, from clean hands after labor, from braiding her daughter's hair by the fire. A man's strength was his adornment, his weathered face a mark of honesty. Their bodies bore the truth of their lives, sunburned, calloused, scarred, but these were not flaws. They were proof of endurance, and in that endurance, a different kind of beauty lived. Festivals and feast days offered rare chances for ornamentation. On holy days, women wove flowers into their hair or tied ribbons of dyed cloth around their heads. Men wore their best tunics, often decorated with embroidery done by wives or sisters. In summer, village dances filled the air with laughter and color. There was no perfume of ambergris or imported silk, only the scent of grass, sweat, and flowers mingling under the open sky. Beauty, for peasants, was joy shared, not image displayed. Superstition also shaped their sense of self-care. Herbs and charms were believed to protect both health and appearance. A garland of rue warded off evil spirits. Washing in dew on May morning was said to bring youth and good fortune. Some women whispered blessings while braiding their hair, believing that a kind word to the spirits would keep it shiny and strong. These small acts blurred the line between hygiene and magic, giving daily chores a sense of ritual. To wash one's face was to cleanse not only dirt, but misfortune. Though poor, peasants were resourceful. They used ashes to scrub stains from skin, salt to clean teeth, and vinegar to preserve freshness in wounds or washing water. They knew the smell of clean linen and the comfort of fresh air. Their beauty was not something displayed for others, but something carried quietly within. It was the satisfaction of order after chaos, of care taken where there might have been none. Imagine a woman at twilight, her hands rough from work, kneeling beside a small basin of water. She wrings out a cloth, wipes the dust from her face, and combs her hair by the light of the hearth. Around her, the scent of smoke and rosemary fills the air. Her reflection flickers in the water, a brief, imperfect shimmer, and she smiles. It is not the beauty of nobility or legend, but of endurance, warmth, and peace. The kind of beauty that does not seek to impress, only to exist. In that simple, quiet way, the peasants of medieval Europe kept a kind of grace untouched by vanity. They could not afford gilded mirrors or perfumed powders, but they carried dignity in their cleanliness, their care, and their connection to the land. Their beauty was honest born, not of wealth or illusion, but of effort. It was a beauty that belonged entirely to them, humble and enduring, shining softly in the flicker of every hearth. In an age ruled by faith and fear, love itself was a mystery half sacred, half forbidden. Marriage was arranged, devotion was expected, but affection was unpredictable. For those who longed for it, beauty alone was not always enough. And so, across medieval Europe, men and women turned to something older than medicine and more daring than prayer, the art of enchantment. Hidden in kitchens and herb gardens, whispered in marketplaces and monasteries, people sought love through potions and charms, blending hope, superstition, and sometimes danger into one intoxicating pursuit. The world of medieval love magic was vast and secretive. Some believed that attraction could be drawn like a magnet, pulled from one heart to another through the right mixture of herbs, words, and will. Others swore that a person's beauty could be enhanced, their allure sharpened, by consuming or carrying certain substances. From noble women in their candlelit chambers to shepherds watching their flocks beneath the moon, the longing for love was the same. They wanted to be noticed, desired, remembered, and they were willing to risk much to make it so. One of the most common love potions was made from wine infused with herbs thought to stir passion. Rosemary for remembrance, basil for devotion, thyme for courage, and mint for charm. Some added honey or cinnamon to sweeten the taste, believing that sweetness in the mouth would create sweetness in the heart. A woman might serve such a drink to the man she desired, or drink it herself before meeting him, hoping to glow with invisible magnetism. These concoctions rarely caused harm, but others were far more perilous. Recipes involving mandrake root, belladonna, or henbane could cause hallucinations, sickness, or worse. Still, the belief in their power persisted. The mandrake, in particular, held legendary status. Its roots, shaped roughly like the human body, were said to scream when pulled from the ground. In folk tales, those who survived the harvest could use the root to inspire love or fertility. Dried and powdered, it was added to potions, or worn as a charm tied to the waist. Apothecaries sold tiny fragments wrapped in silk, claiming they carried the power to awaken desire or bind affection. Whether or not it worked, the mandrake's strange shape and scent captured the imagination, becoming both a symbol of love and a warning of obsession. Not all love magic was drunk or eaten. Many relied on amulets and token small symbols meant to carry personal energy. A lock of hair tied with thread, a piece of clothing from the beloved, a carved heart or polished stone worn close to the skin. Such items were infused with whispered prayers or rhyming charms, words spoken softly at dawn or under the moon. Some charms called upon saints. Others invoked older, pagan spirits that lingered in folk memory. The lines between faith and magic blurred easily when the heart was involved. Women were often the keepers of this knowledge. Wise women, midwives, and herbalists knew the properties of plants and how to use them. Some helped lovesick girls craft charms or discreetly mixed potions to rekindle a husband's affection. Others provided ingredients for those too shy to ask outright. But their power came with risk. The Church condemned love magic as witchcraft, and accusations of sorcery often began with rumors of love spells gone wrong. A woman who knew too much about herbs and hearts could quickly become a target for fear. Yet even under the threat of punishment, the trade in love magic never truly stopped. It was too human to resist. Among the nobility, love charms took on more refined forms. Rings set with specific stones were said to influence emotion: emeralds for fidelity, sapphires for chastity, rubies for passion. Perfumes, too, were used as enchantments. Musk, amber, and rose oil, believed to awaken desire when worn close to the skin. Some nobles paid alchemists to create personalized essences of attraction, distilled from rare flowers and spices. These perfumes were less about scent and more about aura, the illusion of irresistible presence. Even the language of chivalry was steeped in this magic, turning admiration into ritual and longing into art. For common folk, the practices were more humble, but no less heartfelt. A girl might wash her face in dew gathered before sunrise on May Day, believing it would make her beautiful and visible to the one she desired. Lovers exchanged garlands of herbs, each plant carrying meaning: parsley for persistence, violet for modesty, marjoram for joy. Some men carved hearts into the bark of trees, whispering their beloved's name to the forest wind. These small rituals, though simple, gave structure to longing. They turned the ache of love into something manageable, something hopeful. There were darker sides to love magic as well. Potions meant to bind lovers could easily become coercive. Mixtures of blood, herbs, and secret ingredients were slipped into food or wine, meant to create obsession or submission. Some sought to curse rivals, to make them undesirable or ill. These practices were feared and condemned, yet stories of them persisted. Tales spread of kings bewitched by mistresses, knights ensnared by witches, and women who paid the ultimate price for meddling with forbidden forces. Whether real or imagined, these stories reminded people of love's double edge, the line between enchantment and destruction. Despite the dangers, love charms carried an undeniable poetry. They gave people the illusion of control in a world where so much was ruled by fate and faith. In a society where marriages were often arranged for power, not affection, the ability to create one's own bond, however imagined, felt like freedom. To mix herbs beneath the moon, to whisper a name over a flame, was to believe that love could be summoned by will, not born by chance. And in that belief lay both comfort and danger. Imagine, then, a young woman sitting in her cottage at dusk, a bowl of wine before her, a sprig of rosemary floating in the surface. She closes her eyes, murmurs a name, and lets a few drops of honey fall into the cup. The candlelight flickers. She drinks slowly, not knowing whether she has created magic or merely given form to her own longing. Outside, the wind moves through the fields, carrying her hope into the night. Whether the potion works or not hardly matters. In the act itself, mixing, whispering, wishing, she has already created something powerful, a story, a memory, a moment of belief in the possibility of love. And in the quiet corners of medieval life, where superstition met sincerity, that small spark of hope was magic enough. By the end of the Middle Ages, the beauty ideals that had ruled Europe for centuries were beginning to change. The world itself was changing, cities were growing, trade was flourishing, and ideas long buried under dogma began to stir again. The Renaissance dawned slowly, like light filtering through a narrow window, and with it came a new understanding of the human body, the natural world, and the meaning of beauty itself. Yet before those new ideals took hold, the old ones lingered stubbornly. The pale faces, the poisoned powders, the tight girdles, the suffering hidden behind grace, all began to fade, but not before leaving their mark on centuries of flesh and memory. For generations, medieval beauty had been built on contradiction. Purity and vanity, devotion and desire, modesty and pain, all intertwined like threads in the same tapestry. Women plucked their hairlines and painted their faces white, while priests warned against pride. Men polished their armor and perfumed their beards while preaching humility. Everyone sought an impossible balance between appearing holy and being admired. But as the 15th century drew to a close, that balance began to shift. The church's iron grip on thought loosened, and artists, scholars, and physicians started to look not upward to heaven, but outward to the human form itself. The rediscovery of classical texts changed everything. Ancient writers like Galen, Aristotle, and Pliny spoke of beauty in earthly, natural terms, not as sin or divine reward, but as harmony, proportion, and health. Artists began to paint faces that looked alive, with warmth in their cheeks and depth in their eyes. Sculptors studied anatomy, tracing muscles and bones to understand how the body truly moved. Beauty was no longer just pale, and still it could breathe, it could smile, it could live. Yet this new appreciation for realism did not erase the scars left by medieval ideals. Many women still clung to whitened faces and thin frames, their reflections caught between two worlds, one dying, one not yet born. Medicine, too, began to evolve. The superstition of humors slowly gave way to observation and experiment. Physicians realized that lead and mercury caused illness, though their warnings came too late for many. Herbal remedies, once dismissed as peasant cures, gained new respect as scholars studied their effects. The old poisons began to disappear from noble vanities, replaced by gentler mixtures of rosewater, milk, and beeswax. Yet even in this progress, vanity persisted. The desire to preserve youth remained as strong as ever, only the methods changed. Science replaced magic, but the longing remained the same. The decline of the church's moral authority also altered the language of beauty. The old sermons that condemned vanity grew quieter as the idea of individual expression took root. Pain was no longer seen as virtue. Comfort became desirable, even admirable. The severe, tight-laced silhouettes of earlier centuries softened into flowing gowns and looser veils. The forehead no longer needed to be plucked bare, and healthy color returned to fashion. Artists painted women with rosy cheeks, full lips, and golden hair, not ghosts of virtue, but symbols of life itself. It was as if the world was remembering how to breathe again after centuries of holding its breath. Still, not everyone welcomed the change. Many clung to the safety of old traditions. In isolated villages and conservative courts, the old beauty practices continued. Some women still used lead powders in secret. Some still tied their waists too tight, fearing that to let go would mean losing control. The body, for so long treated as something to discipline or disguise, could not easily be freed. Change came unevenly, quietly, through art and conversation more than decree. It was not a revolution of shattering, but of soft undoing. And yet, even as medieval beauty died, its shadow lingered. The obsession with fairness, with refinement, with the careful sculpting of image, these did not vanish with the Middle Ages. They transformed. Renaissance women still bleached their hair with sunlight and vinegar. Courtiers still perfumed their clothes and faces. The ideals of purity and control endured, wrapped now in the language of classical proportion and natural grace. What was once called chastity was renamed elegance. What was once called restraint became taste. The costumes changed, but the stage remained the same. In this quiet transformation, something human endured. Beneath the layers of powder and silk, beneath the sermons and philosophies, lay the same desire that had driven the medieval woman to sit before her mirror by candlelight. The longing to be seen, to be loved, to be remembered. Beauty was never truly about paint or fashion. It was a kind of language, a way of asking the world for recognition. Even as the tools of that language changed, the voice behind it stayed the same. Imagine a noble woman in the late 15th century, seated before her mirror as dawn breaks. She dips her cloth into a jar of cream made from milk and rose water, not lead, not poison, but something soft and fragrant. Her reflection glows faintly in the light. She no longer plucks her hairline or paints her face white. She looks natural, alive, yet still careful. The world outside her window is changing. Painters now speak of form and light, poets of love and humanity. She is both part of the old world and the new. Her beauty, once a symbol of obedience, has become something freer, a quiet act of self-expression. So ended the age of medieval beauty, not with rebellion, but with exhalation. The slow loosening of veils, the gentle release of laces, the fading of powders, the first breath of air against bare skin. The centuries of discipline and discomfort gave way to a new era of curiosity and self-awareness. The mirror remained, but it reflected something different, now something closer to life. And yet, even today, traces of that ancient world remain. The desire for smoothness, the fear of age, the endless rituals of care-all are echoes of those medieval chambers and candlelit mirrors. The names of the potions have changed, but their promise has not. The pursuit of beauty still walks hand in hand with longing, still balances between comfort and pain. The story that began in castles and cottages centuries ago still continues, quietly, every time someone gazes into their reflection and hopes to see not just a face, but a dream. The death of medieval beauty, then, was not an ending. It was a transformation, a passing from the realm of faith and fear into that of art and awakening. The powders faded, the mirrors cleared, and the human face emerged again, imperfect and alive. It was a gentle resurrection, the kind that does not need witnesses, only time. The story of medieval beauty is not just a chapter of the past, it is a mirror still reflecting softly into our own age. The powders and perfumes have changed, the corsets have loosened, and the poisons are gone, but the longing remains. The people of the Middle Ages looked into their polished bronze mirrors and saw not only faces, but fears, the fear of fading, of being unseen, of losing worth as the body aged. And if we are honest, that same shadow still lingers in our modern light. The tools are new, but the dream is ancient, the dream of capturing time, of being remembered as beautiful. Throughout this journey, we've seen how beauty was both a gift and a burden. To be beautiful in medieval Europe was to live under constant pressure, to suffer quietly for a fragile perfection that could crumble in a breath. Pale faces built from poison, hairlines burned away, bodies bound by fabric, skin torn by the rituals of vanity. Each gesture of adornment was an act of endurance, each compliment a reminder of pain. Beauty was not comfort. It was obedience. It was a language written in the skin, one that told the world you belonged to the higher order of grace, even when that grace cost you your health, your freedom, or your peace. Yet, behind the cruelty of those ideals, there was always something tender. The young girl plucking her hairline by candlelight, the noblewoman perfuming her skin with rosewater, the peasant brushing ash from her cheeks, at dusk all of them shared the same small human wish, to be seen kindly. Beneath the rituals, beneath the restraint, was the same yearning that hums quietly through every age. They hoped that someone might look upon us and see not just our face, but our worth. The church, the poets, the artists, and the physicians all shaped what beauty meant, but none could define it fully. It was too vast, too fleeting. It lived in the curve of a smile, the warmth of a glance, the flicker of candlelight on skin. It lived in contradictions, between purity and passion, between holiness and hunger, between body and soul. The medieval woman who risked her life for pale skin, the man who perfumed his gloves to appear noble, the peasant who washed her face in river water at dusk, they all chased the same ghost, the belief that beauty could save them, even as it destroyed them. And perhaps, in a way, it did. For all its pain, beauty gave meaning to their days. It filled cold halls with color, gave art and poetry their muse, and transformed survival into something poetic. Without beauty, the world might have seemed unbearable. Even in hardship, they found ways to make life graceful. And so their rituals, however strange or sorrowful, carried within them a kind of courage, the courage to face decay and death and still reach for something lovely. As you drift now toward sleep, think of the quiet endurance of those who lived long before us, the noble woman in her high hennin, the farmer's wife with flowers in her hair, the monk who saw God's reflection in a single face. Think of how their efforts, however misguided, were born of the same desire that moves us still, to find comfort in beauty and beauty in ourselves. If history teaches us anything, it is that beauty is never just decoration. It is a reflection of the soul's longing, a way of saying, I am here, and I wish to be loved. The powders wash away, the perfumes fade, the centuries pass, but that wish remains untouched. And maybe that, in the end, is what makes it beautiful. Thank you for listening to this story tonight. If you've enjoyed this quiet journey through the strange and tender world of medieval beauty, take a moment before you drift off to subscribe to History for Sleep. Each week, we explore the forgotten corners of history, told softly, slowly, and with care to help you rest while you learn. Leave a comment and tell us what you'd like to dream about next, or when you listen in, whether it is to drift off at midnight or to find peace in a restless dawn. Until next time, may your dreams be gentle, your thoughts unhurried, and your night filled with calm. You've wandered through the candlelight of another age. Now it's time to close your eyes. Breathe deeply and let history fade softly into sleep.